think it's a bank, and some people think it's like some kind of like educational institution, and no one knows what it is. And we're like, yeah, because we got rid of the mountain. It was in our logo and in our name, and before you could just read it. And usually if it says like mountain equipment, you know what that is. There was a lot of heavy lifting in that name and in that logo mark that I think that we missed when it was gone.
Welcome to the Backcountry Marketing Podcast. My name is Cole Heilborn. Today, I'm sitting down with Brock Ellis. He is the creative director over at MEC. Brock, how are you?
All good here up in Vancouver, Canada. Nice to be on the show.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time. I'm excited for this conversation. How's your week been going?
Week's been good. Week's been pretty steady. We've been doing some studio shoots and just getting ready for spring and then into summer and camping season and all those campaigns. So busy.
Awesome. Well, we've got a fun topic we're going to be diving into today. Brock, you suggested this actually when we had our intro call. And I got to be honest, I didn't know the entire history about our conversation that we're going to be having today until you brought it up. But we're going to be discussing a number of things. But throughout the last few years, MEC has gone through a number of changes. You guys have gone through two rebrands. One of them was very controversial. One of them was maybe some will say welcomed or excited. And we're going to dive into this story of MEC's rebrand process, some of the things that went well, some of the things that maybe didn't go so well, and kind of dive behind the scenes. It's been a few years, and so it seems like a good story to look into, and hopefully we can learn some lessons about the process of rebranding and things to consider while you're going through a rebrand. Before we dive in deep, though, Brock, I'd love if you could give just kind of the quick background on your role with the company, quick background on MEC as well, for maybe those of us here in the States who aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, for sure. MEC stands for Mountain Equipment Company. It used to stand for Mountain Equipment Co-op, which we'll get into. But yeah, like it's very much like REI, but a Canadian version of that. Much smaller version of that, but it was like REI, kind of like the go-to place, and still is, I consider, the go-to place to go and get all your outdoor camping, hiking, backcountry skiing, climbing gear in Canada. It started out as a co-op in 1971 and was a co-op for 49 and a half years. And then through COVID, and I would say like pre-COVID, the co-op was getting into some financial trouble, and COVID was kind of like the straw that broke the back, and it ended up being purchased and sold, and then that is now a private company. It's called Mountain Equipment Company. So that, in a nutshell, is we are like REI. We're a retailer of multiple brands, so all the familiar faces of your Yetis and Arc'teryx and Patagonias and Big Agnes and whatnot. And then we also have our own house brand, much like REI. So our job there in our house brand focuses a lot on, like, we do tents and sleeping bags, and then a lot of soft goods, jackets and raincoats and things like that. So and that's like a big part of our company, and a big part of what my job is to inspire Canadians not only to like come to MEC to shop for all of those outdoor camping and hiking things, but also to get excited about MEC label gear. So my gig as the creative director is to run that marketing department and to just let people know about like the great products that we have and get people inspired. Like, we have our brand ethos is to inspire Canadians to have human-powered adventures, as we call it. So not motorcycles, not ATVs, not motorboats and whatnot. It's just kind of like you getting out there and doing your thing and getting yourself up the mountain or across the lake and things like that. So, yeah.
I think I read on, maybe it must have been your guys' website. It was a story of how MEC was founded, but four people were like doing a climb on Mount Baker, and something went wrong. They got caught in a blizzard, and I don't know, was this idea hatched in a tent while waiting for a storm to pass, or what's
You,
the
you
origin?
you got it. You got it exactly right. The founders were in from Vancouver, and they would make all these trips down to REI to buy all their climbing and camping gear, and they got stuck in a tent. You know, they would go down to REI and buy the stuff, and then they'd go on an adventure around there. And yeah, they got stuck in this rainstorm, and they were like, "Man, if only we had something like REI up in Canada." And they actually started it um, just like out of their van. So they got cobbled together some gear and would drive around and go to like the University of British Columbia and tell people when they're set up and just kind of have like climbing gear and stuff in the back of their van. And it slowly grew from that, and it obviously came out of a co-op structure, just really inspired by REI and what that co-op structure was all about. So yeah, it's a really cool origin story. In our flagship store in Vancouver, we have a replica of that van, and just because it's a cool little story of like how it all got started.
Hmm. So let's pivot a little bit. I'm curious, you suggested this as a possible topic to discuss. I'm curious, why is this a topic that you want to discuss? We don't need to go into the details at this point, but what about this story is something that you think is worth sharing with our audience today?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like we talk a lot about branding, and a brand is more than your logo, but it is your logo at the same time, and it's more than just like the typefaces you use, but it is the typefaces you use, and from someone that is in that marketing department and in the creative department, and you're touching those materials all day, it's interesting for me to see um, how people react to what you're putting out in the world, and you have a way of like being friendly with the way that you use your typography, and there's also a way that you could just be like shouting, and that sometimes shouting is great and it's showing excitement, but sometimes like shouting is too much. So it's like I'm just very fascinated by branding. I'm fascinated by um, like having ridden the roller coaster of the MEC branding experience, and seeing how people react to it. Not only you know not only in a crude way of like buying things, but also in like in an emotional way, and how people get really attached to things. And so yeah, just like I just nerd out on this kind of stuff. So I thought that having gone through that, and also I think like there's a lot of conversations around branding all the time. Like all these brands right now, like whether they're doing like small tweaks to it or large tweaks, it's kind of like I don't know if I want to call it like a cautionary tale, but it's like something that we can like look back with the experience of like what's happened and go like, okay, like you know what were the right decisions at those times, and with hindsight kind of go like, do you want to lose any equity that you have in a logo and in a typeface, and keeping consistency in your brand and consistency in that marketplace? And do you just want to throw all that away for like a new direction, and like how much you need to like line things up before you go down that bold path?
Hmm. It's an important distinction you made there, and one we talk about a lot on this show is the idea that your brand isn't your logo, and I think that's a fairly widely understood statement. Your brand is the reaction or the emotional feeling that your audience has towards your brand. But at the same time, the logo is so important because it's that symbol, it's that icon that represents your brand. And as we're going to get into, sometimes when that symbol changes, people can express their feelings about that change, even if the brand itself hasn't changed any of its values necessarily. That change in that symbol can make people happy or angry. So let's dive in first. We're kind of talking about this evolution of the logo, and this has kind of been the discussion over the last few years about this is where it seems like where a lot of the conversation started. So if you could first start by describing what the old MEC logo looked like, because that's kind of where we're building from, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So the original logo, we call it the Twin Peaks logo, and it's like a simple, like the most basic geometric figure of a mountain that has two peaks, and then beside that was written Mountain Equipment Co-op in all caps, condensed font. And and that was the logo. Oh, so MEC started in '71. I think they probably existed without a logo for like a year and a half or 2 years. And apparently, some word on the street is like a customer just came in and handed them like a sketch and said like, "You need a logo. This could be your logo." And they just went, "Okay, sounds good." And but I think that that logo, there is a certain power in, having mountain in your name and a mountain logo and et cetera, et cetera. When I can get into like basically how that evolved, like that was the logo. And then I think some of the strategy around the rebrand at the time was MEC was starting to widen its breadth. So carrying, like road cycling and more like road running, and it wasn't just like purely like backcountry gear. There was like, like we would sell like yoga mats. Everyone seems to focus on yoga as kind of like this turning point, but like in reality there wasn't a whole lot of yoga sales going on. But the truth of it is, it's like it was like they wanted just to make that breadth a little bit wider. They would, we sold like Levi's jeans and things like that. Other things started showing up in the store, and it wasn't just kind of like catering to this kind of like, this kind of like backcountry, more dirt bag or like extreme tripper kind of crowd. And the idea was that perhaps that mountain, and having mountain in our name, limited people's perception about what they could possibly get at the store. And so the idea was that, by kind of like making things a little bit more generic, we were able to like widen that breadth. So that was around 2013. It was 2 years before I showed up, but I remember it quite well when it happened. And I think that, if hindsight 2020, I think a lot of people just kind of like, there's a brief to be met. There's like a directive, and I know that I will give kudos. It's like when like the design company that worked on the logo at the time, they I saw a lot of options in some decks that they had presented, and the end result, which ended up being like a green square that just said MEC in the middle of it, like taking the mountain away and taking mountain out of the name, and just becoming MEC. I think the decision makers who landed on saying like, let's go with that, they went there because they wanted something that was really bold, that was really going to like really be like a sharp right turn, so to speak. So they were kind of like going all in. So I mean, there's something to be said for having the fortitude to go all in on something like that they knew that not everyone was going to like it, et cetera, et cetera. But when I showed up in 2015, and then subsequently in like 2016 and 2017, there was a lot of conversations like, well, people don't know like who we are, and we have to like write that we sell camping gear and all this kind of thing, like on our store windows, because everyone's just like seeing this box that says MEC, and some people think it's a bank, and some people think it's like some kind of like educational institution, and no one knows what it is. And we're like, yeah, because we got rid of the mountain that was in our logo and in our name, and before you could just read it, and usually if it says like mountain equipment, you know what that is. It's not like a bank, it's gear, it's outdoor gear. So there was a lot of heavy lifting in that name and in that logo mark that I think that we missed when it was gone.
So I want to go back a little bit. You said that kind of the impetus for the change from the old logo, which was in effect from like 1971 or 72 to 2012 or 2013, was because you guys were trying to create the perception of more of a welcoming, like open door policy for anyone who was trying to experience the outdoors, not necessarily your elite or your mountaineers, your alpinists, exclusively, at least to them. Which I think is really intriguing, because that's a conversation that's happening frequently in the outdoor industry these days. It's a question I think a lot of brands are asking themselves, and many brands are working on solving. So you guys were asking yourself this question much earlier. What do you feel like, because it's a great question to ask, but what do you think What do you think went wrong? Was there a North Star that got lost, or what got muddied in all these conversations? Because it sounds like the origin of the question was a great question to try to ask, but maybe the answer was slightly off basis, or I don't know. What's your
Yeah,
take?
yeah, absolutely. I feel like as time went on, and and I started having conversations with other people at the company about like, you know, would it be crazy if we brought the old logo back? Because there wasn't like, first of all, when we, and once again, I wasn't there at 2013, but I, as an observer, and having heard from the trenches of people who were there, when that logo flipped, um, the the response was kind of like almost as expected. Like, people don't like change to begin with, right? So, but to go from something that was like iconic on everyone's backpack as they like traveled, like, we get stories of people like when I went to Nepal. I remember I had the Twin Peaks logo on my back, and like an Australian would be like, "Oh, you're Canadian. You have this MEC logo on it." I think it's like, you know, for to lose all that heritage and have it's like the second Canadian flag for like for the outdoor adventure kind of thing, and to just kind of go like, "Oh, we're changing the flag now. Sorry." And then here's your new one, and here's the new flag, and there's the irony is like the design company that worked on it was called Concrete Design, and people are like, "There's an outdoor brand, and you're getting a a company called Concrete," and throwing no shade on them. They're meeting the brief, and I thought that they their presentation deck had some great stuff in it, but like the reaction from the get go was never good, and I think that the brand, they held its ground as you do, and and then I think it became accepted that this is how it is. But as someone who is like, we're always trying to lean on the history of our brand and everything that has been built up over the years. And it's hard sometimes to lean on that history when visually you've lost that thread. So it's like, oh, remember we've been there for all of your adventures, or all of your dad's adventures, or whatever it is, or your mom's adventures. Um, and then for us to present a product and it has the square on it and be like, where's the thread? So, and I think that in retrospect, I think that there's ways that MEC could have kept that existing branding, and you could change that um, through kind of like your typefaces, or like representation, or how you do it within like photography, and we did that as well. um, but maybe you didn't have to go through like the logo change to get there. So like around 2017, we made a commitment to diversifying the people who are in all of our marketing photography, to try. And I think that that's huge. Like, you can be a more inclusive brand and make it feel like a more inclusive space. You don't need to just show rugged white dudes on top of a mountain in order to achieve making people feel comfortable to come into your store. I think the end result of this is some like, through a lot of that work, I feel like people now feel much more comfortable coming into our stores. We've softened our brand, um, but we're still, like we always say, from a marketing point of view, we want to appeal or design for the edges, and that's like, we want to still represent that person who is on top of the mountain, who wants to get on top of that mountain. Your experienced hardcore dirt bags, and then you also want to appeal to someone who's like, I'm just getting into this, and how do I get started? And if you appeal to those, then you can kind of cover the rest. And we look back at MEC was kind of famous for its catalogs throughout the years. It was the only marketing MEC used to do back in the 80s, and we noticed, our CCO Adam Ketchison noticed. He's like, look, every front cover of those MEC catalogs, it always started with like a super hardcore image, or almost always was with like someone's like, on the side of a big crack on top of the chief in Squamish and something like that and dangling. And then you open it up and there's humor. There's like MEC employees having a good time getting silly with photo shoots and like pretending that they're on walls, but it's just shot from the top down, and like they're playing into the gags and stuff like that. And it's like that's where our brand where we needed to regain. So there's like the edges, right? So it's like, yes, we have the gear that will get you to the top of the mountain, but also come in and be part of our club and part of our journey. We're all on the same journey together.
Yeah, interesting. So looking at those old catalogs, was that a moment where you guys kind of realized, oh, this is what we should be aiming for, or did you like dig all those out and start to pull inspiration from them? What did the purpose of those serve for the team in the creative process?
They're always there, but I do think like as our 50th was approaching, so MEC as a co-op existed for 49 years. And then as the 50th was approaching, we started to, pull all these old catalogs out. And it's always fun to go into these catalogs and go down like a heritage nostalgia path. But, um, there was a fair amount of like turnover after the sale on the executive side. And the executive team came in and they were like, it was interesting because no one really knew what to expect when this happened. But the executive team that came in, um, they're all MEC co-op members. They're all people who have had co-op in their lives their whole lives. So um, they kind of like they brought in a bit of a fresh outside perspective. Um, people who had worked at like Arc'teryx and Solomon and all these other outdoor brands, and they're coming in and they're kind of like taking the reins of the ship, and they were like fascinated by the history, and they're like, this is what we need to lean into, and we do something now. It's called modern but familiar, and it's like we want to show up as a modern brand, but we don't want to lose that what makes MEC like this like how we attach ourselves to the hearts of our customers who have been there for a long time. And so really those catalogs are like we don't want to lose like everything that was in those catalogs. So we pulled them all out, and then we saw that there's like, there's a certain formula in there, and it's like that's our path. It's like let's not lose who we are. Let's not completely reinvent ourselves over and over and over and become like this schizophrenic brand. Let's like that's our path.
Modern but familiar. I like that. Yeah, talk to me a little bit about the journey that a brand takes when it slowly reinvents itself over time, because every brand goes through evolution, every brand changes, but as you said, you can't just do a 180 one day and expect people to be along for the ride. Like how many degrees of deviation can you make throughout time to slowly evolve the brand? Like how slow of a process is it?
Yeah, I mean, I always say it's like people shouldn't really notice that your brand is evolving. And, it's really interesting going back to those catalogs. If you lay them all out in a line, you can see that like catalog after catalog, there's an evolution. What was there in like 1975 is drastically different from what's there in like 1992. No one catalog does like severely deviates from what was coming before. So, and I take that approach with my team was like, yeah, we want to try new things. We want to continue to show up, but you never want someone to look at something and go, what brand is this? It needs to be, there needs to be a thread that comes from before. And I think that's when you try to do like a big rebrand for something like this, and you really try to turn everything on its head, as what happened in 2013, where it's like it wasn't only like here's our new logo. There was also like a new typeface, which was like all caps, and it was attached to a campaign. called "We're All Outsiders," which was a pretty cool campaign. But you know, it was all shot in black and white, and so it was like they came out with like the squares, like we're everything for everyone. But then the typography system was like pretty bold and not very flexible after that. So when I started to, you know, like I started just as kind of like a contractor in 2015 doing art direction, and then slowly I became like design director, and then or design manager, and then creative director. And I kind of led the team into like leaning into our secondary font, which was more of like a like traditional Swiss Helvetica style font, and just because it was friendlier, right? And so it's like try to evolve that, but we didn't lose all that typography right away. We slowly evolved it into this, and what we're in when we came into like when we rebranded and brought the Twin Peaks logos back, we didn't come out with a brand new typeface for everything. We do have a new typeface, yes, but it's an evolution of what we had before. So in the way that we mocked things up and presented it, it slowly evolved. So that's essentially it. It's like everything from photography to like how you shoot in the studio. You never just want it to feel like it's nice to occasionally have a slap in the face, like a wake up, like here's this one thing, but you don't pin like a full giant campaign on that, if you know what I mean. Like that might just be like one post on social, see what the reaction is, get some excitement, but for the most part that thread just slowly evolves over time.
Didn't Coke do something where they had like a 180 overnight that they published and people weren't super excited about it?
Yeah,
Was it you who was telling me about
yeah.
that?
Yeah, I mean, this was kind of like, you know, people, Coke, they came up with like a new flavor, and they called it New Coke, and they got rid of their old formula, and there was like rebranding efforts around it, and that didn't go well. And then they reverted, they kept the New Coke, and then they had Classic Coke. So they came back, and then that was hugely popular. And when they first changed that formula, everyone was hoarding their like went to the stores and bought as much old Coke as they could, because you know, and everyone's comparing new Coke to old Coke. And then like in the history of branding and in marketing, people always go back and go like, did they do it on purpose? Is this something that they intentionally did? Because their sales went through the roof after they brought back the classic formula. So you kind of like, you take something away that people love, and then you give it back to them, and then they love it even more. And you say, you're kind of going like, what would it be like if that thing that you loved was no longer there, and now here it is again?
But would they not lose? Do they not lose some sort of trust or brand affinity by doing so? Was there not loss in some way
I think
with that decision?
initially, yeah, massive. But when you come back, I think people feel heard. And that's, you know, to kind of follow our journey at MEC, that was our one of our goals. It was to show people like we haven't fully lost its way. Like there's people there, there's people who work there that I work with who have been there like 20, 25 years. They've been through it all, right? And it's just that kind of place that some people like to set up shop and pitch their tent and never leave, right? And there was a lot of people who like felt that the value of that Twin Peaks and what we had, the equity in that, um, was like there was a lot of meaning within the Twin Peaks, and we understood what that was, and that even though we had gone to the square, we can always go back. And what is going back? What are the gains? You know, is a bit of like a SWOT analysis of like what are the gains, what are the losses, what's going to happen. Obviously, a rebrand is really expensive. Trying to do that through COVID and post sale of a beloved co-op, and when everyone's kind of like um, it's crazy times and social media and everything that gets thrown around. But I think that it was interesting because we were trying to. There was a small group of people who were exploring bringing back the Twin Peaks during the co-op era, and that change was on the table. but it was very like, the co-op was losing money, and they're like, this is how much a rebrand costs, and is it now or is it later? Is this like the right thing to do, et cetera, et cetera. And I never really saw it as like, oh, this will like save the co-op. It was more just kind of like, I think that this would be really rad for us. I think it would get us like, everyone's gonna like love seeing it back on all the gear and on the clothes and on the stores. Um, and I don't think I ever met anyone who thought that the square was like a rad logo, or that they were like wanting to put that on a piece of clothing and whatnot, or wear it. Um, but when the new management came in, it was interesting like how quickly they adopted that proposal. So like it was kind of in the works, and then new management came in and they were like, well, yeah, that is the MEC logo. It's so like they didn't even see it like they were just like, this is something we have to do. And so they've, credit to them, they saw it right away, and they also saw it as a way of telling outdoor adventuring Canadians that they get it, and that this is what it's about. It's not about just becoming like a private company and all of a sudden just like trying to rake in profits. It's about they understood that there's like some attachment to that. So um, yeah, and some love for it, and just it's a way of just showing like Canadians is like, look, like under new management, but the new management kind of like, it gets it, we get it. So
So right, so the co-op got sold. It was bought by a private equity firm.
yeah,
Is that right?
yeah.
Okay, and it was turned into a company. And amidst all of that change is when your team started to consider the rebrand and bringing back the old
I
logo.
would
Is that
say
right?
we started pushing it
Okay.
before that sale, and like I have an old deck somewhere on my computer that we presented to like the CEO of Mountain Equipment Co-op, um, and the balls were like the wheels were slowly rolling, but like I said, like there was a lot going on then, and the change wasn't happening very quick. So I think it may have happened. Um, the appetite was there, but it was there was it was seen as like not now, but soon, kind of thing. So the one thing I remember on that deck was the marketing director at the time, Michael Gray. He made this slide, and it said, "When you try to be everything for everyone, you're nothing to anybody." And that for me was like the most impactful slide, and that was like kind of like the reason, and for me to keep pushing this. And we the design team would like occasionally work the Twin Peaks into like little drawings and stuff like that, and like we did this like uh, Chinese New Year's illustration, and like in the hoof of the ox was like the little Twin Peaks logo, and the MEC still owned the rights to the logo, but we dabbled in it before we kind of like fully released it. But yeah, I think the desire was there. Yeah.
Wait, so that quote was, "When you're something to everyone, you're nothing to."
When
Say it again.
it's when you try to be when you try to be everything to everyone, you're nothing to anyone, or something like that. Yeah.
So considering that quote, considering that idea, which I love, how do you balance that with the original challenge of how do we be welcoming to everyone? As you said, how do we appeal to both sides, both edges? How do you balance that now moving forwards?
Yeah, yeah, good question. It's the first step is to not try to be everything to everyone. So we've really kind of like compacted uh, what our offer is. So you don't go to an MEC now um, expecting to buy everything for like the cottage, so to speak. You don't go there expecting to buy um, a pair of like Levi's jeans or something. So we've kind of like gone like, look, this is like, let's go back to like what we're known for, what we're good at, let's kind of like solidify that offering and make it more pointed to like what like backcountry adventures. Yeah, we do front country camping as well, but like we're a camping store and we're like a climbing and a hiking store, uh, and paddling store like first and foremost, and not that kind of like, oh, I want a picnic basket or I want like a frisbee or like I want like snorkels and stuff like that. So when you solidify that and you have like less of an offering, okay, great, there you are. So you're not trying to be everything that to everyone anymore, right? So if we're trying to bring people who are specifically like, I'm going on a hike. I know I need to go and buy like a pair of hiking boots. And you walk in there and it's like we have the range of hiking boots from like, day hikers or trail runners that will do you fine, right up to like, your expedition boots. And so by having that range and having store staff to have the expertise, you can address all those different people who are coming in, and by basically by having the product, but not having such a watered down experience when you walk in. To walk into a store and go like, what is this store all about? Like, there's a lot of people who don't know who we are, and they walk in and they're like, like, before, like they would walk in, they're like, okay, this is just like a giant department store full of stuff to play with outside. But now you like we've really trying to hone in on like you should be able to, whether you touch us on social or in our stores or online, like you should be able to land and go like, okay, this is what this brand is all about. And if we're not doing that, like then like it's just you have more to communicate when you can't like wrap that into like a more digestible piece, whether that's for like the top of that edge or the bottom of that edge.
I see. What was the first item or public visual that you saw with the new logo? Do you remember what it was?
Yeah. So when we brought back the logo, we put it,
And that was what, 2021 when the logo was officially brought back?
yes, 2021. Yeah, you're right. October 2021. Um, and yeah, we made a giant on the Vancouver flagship store downtown. We just went out and we replaced it on the outside of the store, and which is like a giant square, which is designed, and then we kind of like dropped our logo in a square in big green, and we went out there and we filmed them taking down the old logo and then putting this other logo back on. We filmed that, and yeah, that was like just pretty crazy and pretty exciting. Um, and then it takes time for all these things to kind of like roll over. Obviously, like product was sitting in factories and still needed to come out, and it where it really hit, and like yes, we did a launch and we did we did a campaign called Return to the Mountain, and in our stores we made like giant cardboard cutouts of the mountains, and we even had like a mascot that was like this like Twin Peak mountain mascot that would like run around and go to events and stuff, and we had a lot of fun with it. We made these stickers that had like this like little mascot on it, the new old Twin Peaks logo, and it said like "Don't be a square" on it. So kind of like having some fun with like admitting that hey, like elephant in the room, like we're going back, like this is, let's embrace it, let's have some fun with it. And but where it really like it was really cool seeing that logo go up. But when the new products started coming off the line, I started seeing like when I saw it on like a tent for the first time, I was like, oh man, it's back. Like this is so cool when you see it on a pack. And now it's like, you can't help but like gear watch when you're on a trail. I'm always seeing like what people are wearing all the time, and it's like, it's just like so part of like my brain. And like when I see like someone wearing like the new MEC logo, it's just like, I don't know, just like a lot of pride comes back. So
What was the reaction like from the public when it was announced?
pretty well like night and day from the previous one. I once again, I was just an observer on social media before. Um, as we all know, like social media can be pretty crazy sometimes, and I would say we're probably hitting like 95% positive, which was unheard of. There's still people who are sour over the change of co-op to company. In our new logo, like we don't hold back and pretend we're the co-op. We didn't come out and just say like MEC. Like we're kind of known as MEC or MEC, depending on where you live. But we didn't kind of like try to hide the fact that we're no longer a co-op. And so it says like Mountain Equipment Company, and everyone was used to Mountain Equipment Co-op. So some people just focused on, hey, the old logo's back. And other people, there's some people who are like, ah, it's a company now, and et cetera, et cetera. So you got a few comments like that, opened some like old wounds, or people who just kind of like don't want that change to happen, or et cetera, et cetera. But for the most part, I think it's pretty hard to look at that and not feel something if you're attached to that brand, and not feel like, okay, that something's heading in the right direction here.
What amazes me throughout this story is that like people care so much about the logo. They care so much about the symbol. And like as you said, there's so much heritage and nostalgia wrapped up in this. But when it changes, like people are visibly upset and frustrated. But when you flip the switch and go back, like people are, as you said, 95% of people were excited. It just blows my mind sometimes. Like, I mean, I know that like we all know that logos are they're so crucial. They're so important. But when I'm hearing you saying is like the public know, like they actually care. They actually had a response to these changes, positive or negative. Is just, yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting story. Just knowing how much a logo really does matter to people.
I think it does, and I mean, m- maybe I'm just like in my own little world on it, and I talk to a lot of people all the time who care about these things, and I hang out with like people in marketing and stuff and whatnot. I'm sure if I like sat down with my dad, would he have noticed? I don't know. Like maybe, maybe not. Um, but I just see it as like you can imagine all of the kind of like iconic logos that are out there in the outdoor space. Like what if North Face just suddenly decided to do do a complete like 180, right? And that kind of thing. And that's what it was. So yeah, I think people definitely have those reactions and have those attachments. That's a good question. I think it's history, and it's like for so long MEC was like pretty well like the game in town in Canada to go. Like if you were at all serious about buying a good tent, or a good pack, MEC was the place that you went. Um, Over time, tons of options out there. But back in the day, like MEC and MEC brand, like yes, they sold, like we would sell like MEC label packs, and we'd sell like low packs or something like that. Now there's so much choice, right? And there's so much, you can go on Amazon, you can go direct to consumer, you can. But back in the day, there was no Patagonia store in town. There was no Arc'teryx store. There was no like Sporting Life or all these other brands. It was just kind of like there's MEC. That's where you go for camping, and then there's there might have been like one or two other like fringe retailers, or like we have a big big like box store in Canada called Canadian Tire, and they sell camping gear. And so it was like those like depending on how much money you want to spend. But MEC was that. And so like if you were serious about your thing, you were part of the MEC co-op, the Mountain Equipment Co-op. And I think like you know, I'm a little bit on the older scale of things. I'm in my 50s, but so like I grew up with MEC, but then I also meet tons of like people in like their 20s, and they're like, my dad had all this MEC gear, my mom had all this MEC gear, and it's like they would drag me to the MEC store, and it's just like, it's just like it's a Canadian icon. It's like the same as like I'd put it up there with with like the Toronto Maple Leafs and like sports teams and institutions and the things that like if you grow up and something is always there and it always kind of looks and acts a certain way, and then all of a sudden that changes on you. I think especially like in our world of everything accelerating, like there's something nice that about something that doesn't change and is always there, and you can always rely on it and trust in it and that kind of thing. And it's like MEC was always like hitting home runs on like brand trust surveys and things like that. And there's good reason, because like we stand behind the products we sell, and we have like these like we call it the rock solid guarantee and all that kind of stuff. So it's like it was it was always there for people, and then for that suddenly change is kind of like you know when something institutional changes in your life. It's and for a lot of people the connection to the outdoors also, I think it's such like a deep emotional, you could call it like a spiritual connection, um, and definitely like connected to your pastime. So if that changes and that evolves, then I think it just creates like a bit of a visceral reaction in people, because it's like, oh man, everything is changing. And we have a lot of change in our lives, right? Like everything is rapidly changing around us. And I think it's just nice to have certain things that don't change.
So, if you had to sum up your takeaways from this story and package them neatly for folks who are listening, what takeaways do you have? What did you learn personally through this?
I would say a couple things. One is like if something's broke, and or if you need to make a change, uh, the change might not the change might not need to happen in marketing. Like maybe like don't automatically assume that that graphics and design and things like that are the things that might need to change, or there's a lot of different ways in that you can do it. I think that in the end, MEC accomplished a lot of that through being a more diverse, like showing more diversity in our representation, and by welcoming more people into 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 like what we were doing, into our events, and like holding events that are appealing to not just like one. It's not just kind of like you don't hold an event that is just like how to walk the PCT. It's like you hold an event is like that is welcoming a lot of the different kind of community, and getting them in there. So there's other ways of doing it, and you don't need to just suddenly go like, well, we need to like really change perception. Let's change it through like a drastic like graphic design approach, or a graphic like redesigning a logo or anything like that. Like there's other ways in, and also like really examine like the equity in what you've built up over the years. And sometimes you don't know the equity that you have built. It can, when you work in this industry, sometimes you know you focus a lot on like what's wrong and not on what's right. People, you're seeing like complaints that are coming in through social media, and what they think of this and what they think of that, and like in sales and things like that. And so it's like you just kind of have to like be like, okay, like what's actually working here, like what's successful, and also consider what's sacred. Is there something in your brand that is sacred? So, um, you know, to go back to like the North Face, I would say like their half dome logo, that's sacred. Like they should never change that. They probably have days in which they're like, oh man, we've got these three words and it says the, and our brand is called the North Bay. They probably go through all that kind of stuff, and every brand does. But they're sitting on something sacred. A lot of brands are sitting on something sacred, especially if you've been around for more than 30 years. So, you don't mess with what is sacred. And I would say, like, the last point that I have, like, my last learning is that you can go back. It's not, like you can, it's brave to change, but it's also, it's it's brave to go back and say like, yeah, we messed up. That was wrong. That wasn't right. Like we're listening to the voices out there, and we're listening to like what people are expressing with their hearts and minds.
Hmm. Yeah. So to summarize, don't assume that graphics are the problem. Take equity, take stock of what you have. Maybe focus on what's right rather than what's wrong. Don't touch what's sacred, and you can always go back. People are forgiving.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, for sure.
Well, Brock, this is a really interesting story. I appreciate you sharing because I don't know that many brands would share kind of the insides of controversial decisions, but I think this is a really educational story. And yeah, I might even label it as a cautionary tale. Like changing something big is a big deal, especially when it's a heritage piece that's held on to by thousands or millions of people. So thank you for sharing because I don't know that everyone would be willing to.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do it.
Brock, if folks want to follow along with you, or if they have any follow-up questions, if they want to find more out about the brand, where do you want to send them?
Yeah, you can just go to our website is mec.ca, and same with social. We're on Instagram and Facebook, and we're about to launch our TikTok channel. But yeah, you'll find us there, MEC, and yeah, if you follow me on Instagram, it's mostly just me and my kids, so not too interesting. But yeah, you can hit me up on LinkedIn or something like that.
Okay, awesome. Well, Brock, thank you again. I hope you have a great rest of your day. And yeah, it's been a while since I've been in an MEC store. I think the last time I was in one was when it was the Square. So I need to get back
Dude,
there.
you got to get the new stuff. New stuff looks really good too. It's like, yeah.
It looks pretty epic. All right, Brock. Well, thank you again, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Thanks, Cole.
Bye.